thank you for joining us in this movement against racism. So I will leave the introduction about the forum to Denise later on, but for now, I will just introduce the two people who will be leading us in the national anthem and our prayer today. So uh, Shireen Castillo Go is a graduate of Ateneo de Manila 1993, and she was also a Jesuit volunteer after that and a member of Bukas Palad. And then Lionel will be leading us in the singing of a prayer. And he is also a graduate of Ateneo de Manila in 1993, joined JVP also, and a member of Bukas Palad. So Lionel is also known for his composition, I Seek You For I Thirst. I think that's the song. But anyways, these two talented young people are going to share their talent and lead us in the singing. Shireen?
Hello, please join me. Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mang-aapi, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Dearest Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as I should. To give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and ask not for reward, save that of knowing that I do your most holy will.
So thank you, Shireen and Lionel, for your beautiful music. They're very inspiring as we start our panel discussion tonight. So my name is Denise Lopez, and I'm one of the founding 8 members of the Ateneans for Social Justice. As Donna has mentioned, this was formed just 2 weeks ago, and our goal is really to raise awareness, engage in education and conversation, and also to engage in peaceful efforts that will lead to a more inclusive and equitable society. So just wanted to also tell you I'm a proud Atenean batch 86 psychology major. Um, so today, the purpose of our panel discussion is to learn more about how our Filipino-American millennials think and feel about Black Lives Matter, and why and how they believe it is important to be involved. So we are blessed to have a diverse panel of Filipino-American millennials who have stepped up to the call for this discussion. So some of them were born and raised in the Philippines and came here to study and or work as adults. And others were born and raised here by immigrant parents like ourselves. And some of our panelists have graduated from the Ateneo de Manila University, while others are the children of Jesuit educated parents. So our panelists will represent a mix of academic majors, ranging from communications to politics to law to electronics and software engineering. So they come from a whole range of backgrounds, but one thing I can assure you is they're all highly competent, very promising Filipino Americans. So let me just quickly introduce each of our panelists tonight. There are 6 of them. And as I name you, just say hello or something so people know it's you. Okay. So first up is Michael Barrero. He is a graduate of AP Political Science, class of 2016 from the Ateneo de Manila, and he is currently working as a court specialist at the State Bar Court. Michael?
Hi everyone, good evening. Magandang gabi po.
Thank you. Next is Maddie Nicolas, who is the daughter of an Ateneo alumna, and she recently graduated from New York University in computer science. She works as a software engineer in San Francisco, and she was born and raised in California. Maddie? Just say a few words so people know who.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie. Nice to meet you. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. And third, we have Andy Reyes, who was born in the United States and grew up in the Philippines. And she graduated from the Ateneo as well, BS Environmental Science. And she just graduated from Columbia Law School. And she is currently studying for the New York State Bar exam. Andy?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Fourth, we have Marty Kyoge, who is a graduate of BS Electronics and Communications Engineering at the Ateneo. He was born in the US and came back here after finishing college at the Ateneo. He works as an electronics drafting professional at the Lawrence Livermore National Labs. Marty?
Hi, everyone. Good evening and good morning to those watching from the Philippines. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Marty. Next, we have Rafael Santabaria. Rafael was born in Florida and he was raised in California. He just finished his degree in politics from Pomona College. And in his senior year of college, he worked in contracts management for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Rafael?
Hi, everyone. Full disclosure, I'm Denise's son. Also, I'm technically not a millennial. I'm technically a Gen Zer, but I'm right at the cutoff, so it doesn't really matter.
Thank you. And we have Justin Sombilon, who is currently studying at Stanford University. Her major is communications with a minor in theater and performance studies. Justine?
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. Hi.
All right. So thank you for joining thank you for joining us. So just to let you know our process, we have prepared some starter questions for our panel. There are 6 starter questions, and I'm going to read them as we go. And our 6 panelists have selected, which questions they want to address. So not everybody is going to answer each question because obviously it will take us forever. So I had them select which questions they felt most passionate or knowledgeable about, okay? And the questions will range from setting the context of Black Lives Matter to talking about how millennials and Gen Zers think and feel about this situation, to thinking about how this personally applies to our own ethnic groups, and also what we can do to be allies. So that's sort of the flow of our conversation. So my recommendation for those of you who have questions, please, keep them. You can type them in the chat box, and at the end of our panel, we will go and look at the questions and read the questions for the panelists to respond to. All right? Okay. So first question is, let's start by setting the context. So I'm going to ask Rafael, who is our politics major, to please provide us with a brief background on the history, development, and significance of the Black Lives Matter movement. And after Rafael, I'd recommend also any other panelists to respond and add to the discussion. So Rafael, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so Black Lives Matter is pretty straightforward. It is a movement. It is diffuse. There's not a strong organizational structure, and it's rather new. So it actually started trending as a hashtag on Twitter a few years back when I believe George Zimmerman was acquitted from his murder of Trayvon Martin back in 2013. And it picked up steam after more African-American men were killed, even though they were unarmed, by police officers in episodes which amounted to summary execution, basically. So it became a social media-based movement in the beginning, but obviously there was a strong commitment to protesting in public en masse, using sort of, I would say, disruptive tactics as far as getting people's attention, getting out there, making sure everybody knows this is an issue, because previous civil rights, movements which happened beforehand, usually they were tied more to, say, a political party such as the Democratic Party, or they were focused within a certain religious context, or it was, not necessarily a diffuse movement, which was not led by any specific individual or individuals. Even though the people who began the Black Lives Matter hashtag, they're identifiable, they're out there, they're activists, they're big names. The movement really is supposed to be a movement. It's not an organization necessarily. There's numerous chapters all over the country, all over the world at this point, where people will, for the sake of organizing protests, will meet and they'll speak about Black Lives Matter and advocate. But it's not, like I said many times, it's not an organization the way that we think about one. And yeah, I mean, what's really more important is going to be covered by the next questions, like understanding what Black Lives Matter really means, what it's about. And that's pretty much it as far as the background goes. It's quite straightforward.
Thank you, Rafael. Any other panelists wants to add to just the background or context of Black Lives Matter?
I can add, I think it's also important to recognize that it was really started by 3 radical Black organizers who are women. And even though it was spurred on because of, the acquittal of George Zimmerman. I think it's grown to become a movement that, as Rafael said, like, is all about how Black lives are targeted by state-sanctioned violence, especially Black women, and has also grown to encompass like anti-Black racism as well. So that's a really like it's what the movement has grown into.
Thank you. So the next question is, what are the arguments for and against the Black Lives Matter movement? What might be some misconceptions that people have that we need to correct? So let me start with Maddie. Anything you want to say with regards to the arguments for and against Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, definitely. So as Rafael mentioned, Black Lives Matter is relatively new, but actually goes back, several years. And yeah, the biggest argument for is obviously that since the founding of the country, Black lives have been, devalued. They've been the victims of all kinds of violence, both like fatal and, hate crimes and all these other, crazy ways that they've been prejudiced and had acts of violence against. And so Black Lives Matter is like an explicit movement to call out that those lives have been devalued and that they do matter. And that, it's a coalition of people across like all, spectrums of, politics and like all different backgrounds to collectively support Black lives and show that they do matter. I think the main argument against Black lives, I think, is that most people think, or some people think that saying that Black Lives Matter negates that all lives matter, or is that it's in opposition to all lives matter. And that's something that Dean Tony spoke about last week, actually. But I think that kind of leads into a misconception about Black Lives Matter, and the idea that by supporting Black lives, the people who support Black lives, for example, might be against supporting other types of people, such as white people or blue lives, as in reference to cops. So that's a big misconception, I think, in that Black Lives Matter is not opposed to, the fact that all lives do matter. All lives do obviously matter, but Black Lives Matter is explicitly calling out lives that have been devalued and been victimized. So that's the main goal of Black Lives Matter.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Let me ask Andy and Rafael, do you guys have something else you want to add to the arguments for and against Black Lives Matter?
Andy, would you like to say anything?
No, I think that Maddie covered it really well. I think one really helpful analogy to understanding the misconception, because I do think the misconception about Black Lives Matter mostly lies with the all lives matter argument. And I think a really good analogy is, if you're sitting down at a table and everyone is given a plate of food and one person isn't, and you then say, "Can I have some food?" And whoever's serving the food responds, "Everyone deserves a plate of food." That's true, but there's one person who doesn't have a plate of food. And that's I think a good way to understand the Black Lives Matter movement and why all lives matter doesn't really work logically when it comes to a pushback to Black Lives Matter. So that's just a way that I thought of as an easy way to understand the movement. Rafael, do you have other thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that all lives matter, and more specifically Blue Lives Matter, began deliberately as hashtags, counter movements, to take attention away from or paint Black Lives Matter in a specifically bad light. So even though we all know that all lives matter, that's a given for hopefully everybody, the way in which that specific phrase was used by people who do not support Black Lives Matter or do not understand it or for whatever reason are opposed to it was specifically against it. So, if you're having interactions on social media or something, just be wary of that, because there's a lot of misconceptions which we're trying to clear up. As well as another thing to consider is, this is a little bit, this is way less known, but something that I have talked about with my friends who are all of different ethnicities, non-white ethnicities, so Native American, Black, Latino, Asian, East Asian, some people in different ethnic communities, which are non-white communities, but non-Black as well, sometimes I've heard people say things like, well, Black Lives Matter, like takes away from the fact that Chinese lives matter, or like Latino lives matter, or something like that. It's important to note that Black Lives Matter is not supposed to create competition between minorities in regards to, attention for civil rights and better treatment by the police and the authorities in general. Black Lives Matter is trying to point out that specifically African Americans have faced these issues in specific ways, targeted ways, for a very long time. And the idea behind it in context of ethnicities such as ours is to build solidarity across different lines. It's not to create favoritism in a sense. I remember speaking to one of my friends who is Native American, and he was saying that something that some Native Americans say is, who are opposed to Black Lives Matter because they don't understand it, is Brown Lives Matter. So you'll notice misconceptions from all sorts of groups, different groups of people, but really, it's supposed to be about solidarity, and it's not supposed to be a divisive movement.
Thank you, Rafael and Andy and Maddie. Let's move to the third question. How are you personally reacting to Black Lives Matter, and why does it matter to you? Why should it matter to Filipinos? Okay, so let me start with asking Justine. How are you reacting to it, and why should it matter to us?
I think the most difficult thing for me between all of this is that I've really had to confront the own biases that I have within not only like the things that I have always known to believe, and like this
Oh,
I think she froze.
yeah, I think she froze. Justine?
Media is like something very important to me, but oh, did I freeze?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry about that. But I realized that I talk a lot of big talk about being anti-racist, but I talk about being anti-racist when it comes to pertaining me as being an Asian American. I advocate really strongly for Asian American representation, but I think through all of this, at least the most visceral feeling that I've had is that I've asked myself, what will I stand for when issues that don't necessarily pertain Filipino Americans or me as like an
Oh,
that
oh, it's unfortunate. She froze
I
again.
think there's a lot of gray area. I think it's really a question of like morals. Oh.
We heard some bits of it.
Oh.
They were really good parts, but you kind of froze a little bit, Justine.
Okay, I can.
Yeah, so maybe it would help if you maybe later just don't show your video and just talk, okay?
Okay, okay.
But if that's okay with you, let me ask some other members of our panel how they feel, how they're reacting to Black Lives Matter. Why does it matter to us Filipinos? Let me ask Marty. Marty, your thoughts?
So my personal reaction is, I've read up on the history of it all, and this is something that's been going on for centuries, and the fact that what happened during the 50s and 60s when that was sort of the last time activity peaked, because you could really see segregation being something ingrained in people. The incident on the bus with Rosa Parks, and all the assassinations that happened, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, they died advocating their cause, championing their cause. And to me, I feel like with Black Lives Matter, this movement really breaking out in the last 7 years. I feel like it's time. So that's why it matters to me, because I feel like with everything that's happened within centuries, this generation of people advocating for change, they want the change to happen at last, once and for all. And it should matter to Filipinos because, you know, we as a people, we're you know, we're sort of accepting of everyone. We have this, we're associated with being hospitable, and we should champion the cause of blacks being accepted in the world, just as fellow humans. That's really what it is. And so uh, I so it's really uh, eliminating prejudice, eliminating wrongness that has been going on in the world for for uh, for centuries, and it's gotten so
Oh no. Marty?
toxic that once we were hello, once we were westernized during
Yes.
college. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. So once everything was westernized, we took the values uh, of sort of white supremacy, and we wanted to we were looking for ways to get for skin to get lighter. So it's gotten that toxic that the values have spread uh, beyond U.S. shores, and to me that has to change.
Thank you, Marty. Let me call on Michael. You want to add to this, your response to this question about how are you reacting to Black Lives Matter? Why does it matter? Why should it matter to Filipinos?
First and foremost, how I reacted, I saw the video of George Floyd and that officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck. And what's particularly defining for me was there was an Asian man, also Asian police officer there, and he was not doing anything. And how I see it is, it just really awakened me. It just I think that's the power of media nowadays and all these iPhones that we can record all of this. It's like seeing like a modern picture or a modern video of lynching. So it was very striking to me. And then it made me want to act, do some action to support the movement. So, and then to the second question, why it should matter to Filipinos. So Marty and I think Justin touched a lot upon that, but I just wanted to highlight that it should matter to us because we are also immigrants here. We also experience racism in one form or another, and discrimination, the action that's caused by this prejudice. But also with self-reflection, I also realized that even before going to the US, we already have our own biases and prejudice against people of color, against non-white groups of society, starting with our colonial past. We had European, the Spaniards, and American conquerors who had lighter skin and kind of imposed, aside from a view of white supremacy, of having a more advanced culture, they also showed up, tried to instill in us a sense of colonizer. So they're the colonizer and inherently more superior than the colonized. So I think we have to take that into consideration too. But just basically, we are also an immigrant group here, and we are affected by the systemic racism. And as Marty touched upon, basically these are our fellow human beings, and it doesn't have to stay within racial boundaries, but just a concern for equal treatment of people and respectful manner, and avoiding all sorts of prejudice and racism, and all sorts of injustices that happen in our society.
Thank you, Michael. You actually kind of segued us into our next question, which was what biases do we need to confront as a community, right? And what can we do to counter anti-Blackness and other biases? So let's talk a little bit more about that. And again, who wants to start with this? Let me go back to Maddie. Um, what are your thoughts on the biases we need to confront and how we can start to counter anti-Blackness and other biases?
Here we go. Yeah, actually before that, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Michael said about having solidarity for the Black community, and just reference a point of history and actually Filipino history during the Philippine-American War, when actually the US was sending actually groups of Black troops to come and fight against Filipinos. And actually in that case, when that happened, a lot of those, a few of those people did like defect and defect against the US and in support of Philippine independence. And for them, it was upon seeing that Filipinos were also victims of, you know, white supremacy and colonialism, and realizing that they were also like, how could they fight in support of the US and white supremacy against other groups that were being victims of the colonizers. So that's like a point of solidarity that I think
should probably try.
That I think Filipinos can remember today, knowing that we shouldn't support the Black Lives Matter movement because it's transactional, but because we're rooted in also collectively fighting against racism and for justice. But in that same vein, I think a lot of Filipinos who immigrate to the US and, you know, after the Philippines gained its independence, and as those Filipinos had their children, I think most Filipinos have just tended to assimilate into American culture a lot more. Manny referenced, you know, Filipinos wanting to have lighter skin and wanting to appear in more proximity to white people, to Americans. So I think a big bias that a lot of people still do have is the colorism against people with darker skin, which has become over time kind of like an indicator of socioeconomic status. And even like in my lifetime, I've had several family members who, you know, tell you to make sure to always put on a lot of sunscreen when you go out, or to, you know, point out when other people have darker skin, even Filipinos themselves. And that is also rooted in a lot of the colonialism by the Spanish and Americans. But another thing that I think is a big part of our biases is how Asians and Asian Americans sort of benefit from the model minority myth in the US, which is something that was actually instilled by white people to sort of, that in some ways has pitted Asian Americans against other people of color in the US. Mm-hmm. So that's like a big thing that a lot of Asian Americans need to reject in order to, because it's like using the model minority myth from white people has been used by Asians to sort of side with white people and look down on other groups of people of color, especially other groups of people who might not be as you know, as advanced in terms of education or economic status. So that's something that Asians have to actively reject.
Thank you. Rafael, please jump in.
Yeah, so this is actually something I wanted to say to the last question, but definitely Maddie's points are super important, especially the model minority thing. So something I need to point out actually, which is I've noticed is incredibly underemphasized even amongst Filipinos, is if you look at the writings of Filipino-American authors who came to the United States in the first major wave of Filipino immigration to the States, which was the early 1900s following the Spanish-American, Philippine-American War, authors such as Carlos Bulosan. I actually took a class on this last semester, Asian American Studies, where we studied Filipino-American authors. one specific reason why it's important, I think, to have Filipino and African American solidarity is when the first wave of Filipinos that came to the United States, we were not associated largely with the Asian model minority myth. In fact, the racialized negative stereotypes that were attached to Filipino migrant workers were those that were taken from Black people. So Filipino Americans in the first wave of immigration, and even today still, depending on whether or not you look more dark or not, which is to say a lot of Filipinos, is the stereotypes that were attached to a lot of Filipinos in the past and even continuing today tended to be that of, you know, disrespect towards authority, tendency towards violence and crime, tendency towards over-sexualization. You know, if you read the writings of Filipino American authors such as Carlos Bulosan, they're not saying what the Asian American narrative is, which is against Black, you know, American experience. In fact, you know, when Filipinos specifically, when we ignore the parallels of the racist stereotypes that were attached to us in the past and continue today, also these are stereotypes that are attached to many Latino groups as well. When we ignore that we have many similarities to that, which are exceptions from the pan-Asian American narrative, it helps us build solidarity. And when we ignore those things, it makes us associate ourselves with groups which we're historically have not been racialized as, and it encourages us to continue the regressive Asian American model minority myth, which it's doubtful whether that was ever attached to our ethnic group in the first place in the United States. So when we perpetuate that, and when we try to oversimplify our own experience by just grouping ourselves with a pan-Asian American narrative, that's anti-Black, and that's also anti-Latino, you know, and that's also just ignoring the writings of these many great, you know, Filipino American authors. So the only reason why I know this is because I had to take a class on it, which is really surprising. But the fact that we don't talk about it means that the only way I could learn about it was through a class. So, you know, that's definitely, I don't know, something I wanted to add because it's something that's very much ignored.
Thank you. So let me just push back the question to the panel again. What can we do to counter anti-Blackness and other biases? So certainly knowing our history, appreciating that, fighting against the model minority narratives, those are things we could do. Any other thoughts of how we can counter anti-Blackness?
Hi, this is Justine. I turned off my video just so I could hear better. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, of course. I definitely think tolerance, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, but tolerance always starts in the home. You know, I think difficult conversations need to be had right now between people of different generations back and forth, because I don't know, I think it's at least for me, it feels almost like it was meant to be that all this racially charged conversations are being had when we are stuck at home, when we are stuck with the people that raised us, the people that instilled values in us. And I think the most beneficial conversations to be had are those that are based in truth from all parties involved. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable or heated they can get. I think there needs to be some sort of admission of biases, whether they're intentional or not, and that is when we can begin to talk of acceptance and working towards shifting perspectives or understanding or giving resources to kind of rework a lot of the biases and like intergenerational disparities between this kind of stuff.
Thank you, Justine.
Yeah.
This actually sort of starts us on the fifth question, which is really what kinds of conversations should we be having with each other, with our different generations, such as our parents, our grandparents, our friends, right? So let's hear from the others. Michael, Marty, you guys want to comment on this conversation?
So I'll start. So one conversation we can have is, so as Filipinos, we may have been colonized, but it pales in comparison to me, really, to being treated as inferior within one's own country. I mean, we're for the Filipino Americans, we're immigrants. For the Filipinos, we're not even, we don't even live here. And so for African Americans to have to worry about being accepted in their own country is it's
Thank
it
you.
should be it should be a point of concern,
Yes,
definitely.
right?
And so
Mm.
again I bring up the toxicity of it, that this has spread beyond U.S. shores. And so Filipino folks think in the same vein. You'll see it in pop and ad culture. Mestizos and mestizas are highlighted. Whitening products break out, as I mentioned earlier. So it is what it is. Whiter folks just stand out. They've stood out to Filipinos for having foreign Western looks, and you don't see too much of it in our part of the world. So to the older folks with who happen to have bias, Western influences are alive in you. They are discriminatory, and there's no way around them because they put down African Americans as being lesser human beings. So uh, don't put mestizos and mestizas on a pedestal for their looks. Don't prejudge African Americans for their looks either. So a conversation I'd have from my personal thoughts and experiences is, so having moved back here, I moved back here almost 3 years ago after doing all my schooling in Manila. And so after that Filipino upbringing with mostly Filipinos, I couldn't help but feel a diversity shock in a place like the Bay Area. So you have all these people from different parts of the world, different accents, different builds. So how do we get over that kind of shock? The idea that people are people, our personalities are longing for, and our goals are geared toward the same thing, happiness. So uh, it I think that's a really important
Okay.
conversation to have, that worthless. So
Thank you, Marty. Michael, you want to add?
Yes, I can add a little bit, and I just want to go back a bit to the question number 4. With our biases, we can unlearn basically all our biases. Like, for example, gender bias. There was that belief that women are incapable of some jobs, which was proven by disproved. I'm sorry, by like World War II and historical events in our life, and now women are valued as almost the same level as men. That's a separate conversation, but basically what I'm trying to say is any bias or prejudice like we can unlearn it. And so for us to confront our biases, I like what Justin said. We have to kind of reflect. We have to look towards inwards and have an ugly, reflection that how were we racist in the past, what prejudices that we have. So basically, we can unlearn that. But aside from that self-reflection, I think education is important. As with the Black Lives Matter movement, you see a lot of people writing about their experiences, and as a lot of resources from Black writers. A lot of, like, for example, we have a lot of documentaries right now. We have a lot of movies. We have a lot of articles on social media, and just a continued education. It's a process. It's a progress, but we can unlearn these biases and prejudices that we have. Aside from that, I like to highlight two conversations. Can be difficult, which is our fifth question. Yes, about conversations. I believe conversations must be honest and sincere. Like an alcoholic, we cannot really create or start thinking about solutions or ideas to make things better until we recognize that there is something wrong. So education plays a key part in that, but also honesty and conversations. Aside from that, conversations should be two-way, I think, especially between generations. Um, for my personal experience, I asked my relatives, my grandparents, how was your experience when you moved here? And they told me there's a lot of, you could see still how their perspective was shaped by the government, by the media, uh, which are very racist views, such as criminalizing the image of the Black man. So that's very apparent in their experience. And it's a dialogue, and I think it should be very sincere, but also we should be kind, because they were those beliefs were also a product of their time. Aside from being kind, I think we should have sympathy for when engaging in this dialogue. A lot with hostile conversations, people can be defensive, especially, or can be argumentative, especially people who don't share your view. I've talked personally to Filipino families and friends, or even Americans who are actually pro-violence, and or you could say they lean more towards the police lives or Blue Lives Matter movements, and some are also hold like anti-immigrant views. So these conversations, it shouldn't be hostile. We should take a kinder road. We are aiming for a kinder and a more just society, and our methods should be the same. We should be understanding and accommodating. I think there's importance in engaging, even if their views are different, because for now, at least they get to hear what you have to say, or the opposing viewpoint. They may not accept it, but eventually down the road, they can come back to you and engage in that dialogue again.
Thank you, Michael. So as